So for today, I'm going to show you how I make a lot of my collage paper, all the repeated patterns, etc. And we are going to use some of the explorations we did in the last two, where we did traditional tools and non-traditional tools and all the beautiful mark making we did. So I want you to go through and look at all of the patterns you have, and in it with all of the patterns that we did, all of the found objects we used. You see the found objects there, the traditional, non-traditional tools. I'm sure you had your favorites. And so you can choose which ones were your favorites and try to put them onto different sheets of paper. So as you apply them in your sketchbook, you remember our sketchbook is to explore and find out all the amazing things we can do with different tools, etc. And now we are going to put it on all of our different types of collage paper. So as you see, I'm going through, I have book paper, which I love. Get an old book. I know some of you cringe to tear books apart, but if you have a really old book, you can use that. You can get them in thrift stores. I have magazine paper. I have printing paper. I have construction paper, lined book copy paper. You know, anything goes. This one here is actually wallpaper, which I love. It has a really lovely texture, easy to tear, easy to glue. More magazine paper of all different thickness, etc. You can use the printed image where it's has images on it and colors on it, or the text part, as I showed you before. That was parchment paper. I love parchment paper. It gives really beautiful patterns and designs and texture as well. We have lined paper, and a lot of this pattern paper I have is from scrapbooks. You know, the scrapbooking book pad. You could get so many beautiful designs out of there. So that's just one little selection of paper that I gathered, but you can go around and see what other type of paper you have. You could even have painted paper. As you saw right there, I had corrugated cardboard, so I can print on that or design that as well for collage. And you can also go and get just regular copy paper and you can paint it. So you paint them just one flat color, so you have colored paper. If you don't have construction colored paper, okay? So you have a background of a color, and then you can do. So you see I have my red construction paper there, the black, the orange, the cream, etc. But if you didn't have any colored paper, you can just paint on a piece of white plain paper, and you have colored paper there. And then you can do your mark making on top. So I just chose some of my favorites. I had a big pile. I'm just going to do a few to give you an example. And I'm going to go in and again, just like our explorations that we did with non-traditional and traditional tools, just using black, either black ink or black paint. Here I'm using black paint. As you notice, my first palette was really dirty, and I can use that because I'm using the black on top, but I just didn't want it to visually confuse you. So I got a fresh palette here. I reused my styrofoam containers, and they make an excellent palette. And so I'm going in with the brush first. Now the brush is what we used first in our tools. That's a traditional tool. And this is just one way of using the traditional tool in a very traditional way, making brush strokes and making nice, short, thick brush strokes with a medium-sized brush. And I'm going straight through, repeating. It seems simple, but when you tear this up, it will make beautiful collaged paper that you can use. Now remember, you can do several of these in different ways, using different types of paintbrushes, different thickness, a thin one, a thick one, medium size, etc. You can use the paintbrush in different ways. We did that in our explorations as well. On the side, we did it with a dry brush or with a little more water, etc. In these, I'm using the paint pretty thick, not too thick, just as it comes out of the container, and those paints are, not as thick. Here I'm using the paintbrush in a different way again. Look at that, making these kind of waves, almost like a a wave of the sea, over and over, repeating again. Again, a simple pattern, simple mark making, but it can make beautiful, beautiful collaged paper. Now, I mentioned dry brush. That's a dry brush right at the end there, where the paint is coming off, and then you're seeing some of the color coming through. That it gives a lovely texture, don't you think? That's a dry brush effect. And so I'm putting them aside to dry, let them dry, and you can continue. Do as many as you like. I'm showing you a few options and a few different things, but you can just do a stack of different ways you can use the paintbrush. You remember we used the end of the paintbrush for a different feel as well. Here I'm going in to my stash of non-traditional tools. You remember when we use the wine cork? So I used the wine cork, and here I'm getting it. The first one I dotted down did not come out that good, but that's fine. Look, see? There you go, my wine corks, and you will get many different variations depending on how much ink or paint you have on there. As you can see, the first one, when it has a lot on it, it never really gives a great effect. It can give you just, a black blob, and that's nice as well. But as it goes along, then it loses paint, and you get some really interesting textures, shapes. You get the circular shapes, but every circular shape is different. And so, of course, when you tear that page, you get some lovely collaged pieces. And the best part of that is seeing the book text coming through in between. As you can see, I'm leaving negative spaces between, so you can see the book text, but I can also just go over and over and overlap them, and that's a different effect as well. So that's one page, and how lovely is that? So you can continue doing these things. And of course, I'm using all black right now. Remember I said sometimes when we want to just go through and experiment, I'm using all black. But now that we're making collage papers, I will probably do another video where I use colored paint, same way. So I can take the same tools and use this, like I would dip this cork into red and stamp it onto a magazine sheet or another pattern paper or plain paper. So here I'm continuing with my cork because I love the effect it gives. And the first one was on plain paper, and now I take it onto magazine paper. So this magazine page has like t-shirts on it with stripes and different colors, and I think it looks so lovely. As soon as you start adding some sort of pattern and mark making onto it, it no longer becomes that boring magazine sheet. It becomes a really interesting sheet of dots and circles with interesting lines coming in between. You're not really seeing the t-shirts, especially when you start tearing it to make as collage. You're not going to see that where it comes from or what it was in its entirety before. So I'm going with another sheet. I'm going here with the parchment. With the parchment, you will see a different type of effect you get, where how the paint reacts to the texture of the parchment paper. And I am going in with my toothbrush. You can look through the sketchbook pages that we did with non-traditional and traditional tools and look at some of the shapes and marks we made with our toothbrush. Okay, so I'm just playing around, seeing how I want to use it. I want to stamp it a bit, I might use it in different ways. As you get the hang of it, repeat and repeat until the paint runs out, and then you try another part of it and see what other mark making you can use with it. Now I'm just making these long streaks, seeing what I can get from it. And so on this page, I'm doing multiple marks just from the paintbrush. So just continue and explore all that you can possibly imagine with this. I change it here and I go back into what I decide to use here, the sponge. What happens when you use the sponge on the stick? Oh, look at that. That gives a beautiful texture. And the quality of the paper, it's a parchment paper, and this is water-based, so it creates this almost like a resist. It's starting to kind of bead a little bit and pull away from it. I think actually that might be wax paper, and that's why the wax would make it do that. And so I just put it aside and let it dry, and it gives a lovely effect. So you just keep bringing out different types of paper and look for inspiration in the examples that you did for your non-traditional tools and traditional tools. If you have not done that, I highly recommend, you can still follow along with me and try and get these things, but I would recommend that you explore that exercise. That's the first exercise I really like to start with when we're getting into mixed media. So you explore the two different areas of tools, the traditional tools that we have and the non-traditional. The non-traditional is literally anything you can find, found objects, things that have a purpose in using it one way and you can use it in another way. What I'm using here right now is the cover of one of my old Posca pens. Okay, so the Posca pen dried up, ran out, and I kept the cover because I know I can dip it in ink and paint and create this beautiful patterned effect. Look at that, overlapping these circles. And imagine that in a collage. Rip it, tear it, cut it, and put it in a collage, So that's a non-traditional tool. Traditional tools, if you didn't do the exercise yet, is anything that is known as a traditional art tool. Paintbrush is number one. Pencils, pens, paint pens, crayons, we have pastels, we have oil paint, all sorts of what we traditionally use in art, okay? But then the non-traditional tools, you would have so many. You can't run out of them. Anything, literally anything you can find, a rock, a stone, a leaf, the top of the pen, as I showed you, and over, anything that you find. We had cord or rope, a nail, a piece of metal, a piece of wire, over and over. Oh, I love using this as well. This is book paper again, and it's just rolled tight into this kind of tube, and I dip it into paint or ink, and then stamp it. So you're going to get a circular kind of a feel, but not as regular as that circle from the paint pen cover. Look at that. It's a smaller circle, and it gives a different sort of effect, and it's not a full circle, but look at that. With the edge, so the edge that is curled, the part that ends, it creates this outer piece, almost looking like a six, but with a short top. So your patterns could just keep going. It's limitless. And part of the reason why I love mixed media is because there's so many possibilities. You can just I sit for a whole day sometimes and just make collage paper. Going in here with a stamp, I would categorize a stamp as a traditional tool because we can use it traditionally in art. It's, you're stamping and you have a pattern that's on the stamp. And you can make your own stamps as well. And you can make your own stamps from non-traditional things, non-traditional tools. I've made stamps from the very wine cork that I used to make those beautiful circles earlier. You can carve into them and create a stamp of your own. So as you can see, you can play around with stamps and see, you know, how much paint. You have to experiment to see, because sometimes you have too much paint, it gets blotchy, you don't see the design, and then as you have less paint, you can see more of the design. And you can use your stamps as well. I have ink for the stamps, so to really give a better pattern, but the paint works as well. So now I have another sheet, and I'm just going to explore. So please continue just exploring. Look at that, I'm constantly going back in. As you can see, I spelled the word sponge wrong. Please forgive me. I've decided I'm going to use a sponge. I'm going to use a sponge now and create. I love using sponges for that texture. The texture is amazing. It really gives an in-depth texture. It's certainly not flat. And you can create different types of textures as well, depending on how much paint or ink you put on it. So there, I'm testing out one of my sponges there. It's a little stiff because I don't always wash off the paint. So with acrylic paint, it can get it really stiff, and that will give a different type of texture as well. So I got another one that was softer, and I just stamp in to the paint. And of course, the first stamp is going to be very dark, but then as the paint gets less and less, because it's on the paper, you get some really interesting. And I like going from dark to light. Look at that. It just creates a depth that you can't really get from other things. And remember, different types of sponges will give you different effects as well. So this is a different sponge. It has these large holes in it. You can use a household sponge, which will give you a very different texture and a very different effect. And I love using sponges with different colors as well, because you get that mixing of the color, and you get some very sophisticated mixing as you go along with the colors. But right here, we're just using black alone. So for this video, we're just experimenting with traditional and non-traditional tools, just using black ink or black paint. Here I have black acrylic paint, and I used it straight from the tube. It's a craft acrylic paint, so it's not heavy bodied, and so it's straight from the tube, and I don't have to really add any water to it.